The church bells rang out across the small coastal town of Mendocino as hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their final respects to Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a decorated Navy helicopter pilot who had vanished 3 weeks earlier during a routine training mission off the California coast. Her parents sat in the front pew clutching a folded American flag, while her fellow aviators filled the rows behind them in their dress whites. The search had been called off after 10 days. The Pacific Ocean had swallowed countless souls before Sarah, and the Coast Guard knew the grim statistics. Water temperatures in January rarely allowed for survival beyond a few hours, even for someone as physically fit and mentally tough as Sarah. Her Seahawk helicopter had gone down in a storm, and despite deploying every available resource, no trace of her or her aircraft had been found except for a few pieces of debris washing up on nearby beaches. Pastor Williams spoke of Sarah's dedication to serving her country, her infectious laugh that could light up any room, and her dream of becoming a test pilot. He read letters from her squadron mates, each one painting a picture of a woman who never backed down from a challenge and always put others before herself. Sarah's mother, Margaret, dabbed her eyes with tissues as she listened to story after story of how her daughter had touched so many lives in her 28 years. The military honor guard performed their ceremony with precision, folding the flag in crisp triangles before presenting it to Sarah's father, Commander James Chen, a retired submarine officer who understood the risks his daughter had chosen to accept. The empty casket, draped in flowers, served as a symbol of a life cut tragically short. Taps echoed through the sanctuary, and not a single eye remained dry. After the service, Sarah's family and closest friends gathered at the Chen family home overlooking the ocean. They shared memories, looked through photo albums, and tried to find comfort in each other's presence. Sarah's best friend from flight school, Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, stayed close to Margaret, helping her navigate the waves of grief that seemed to crash over her without warning. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the mourners slowly departed. The house grew quiet except for the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Sarah's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it before her final deployment, her flight suit hanging in the closet, her aviation book stacked neatly on the nightstand, and a photo of her with her parents at her commissioning ceremony sitting proudly on her desk. Margaret walked to Sarah's window and stared out at the endless expanse of water that had claimed her daughter. The ocean looked peaceful in the evening light, betraying no hint of its violent nature or the secrets it held beneath its surface. She whispered a quiet prayer and closed the curtains, not knowing that somewhere far beneath those same waters, a small electronic device continued to transmit a faint but persistent signal into the depths. The memorial service had provided closure for the community, but for the Chen family, the real journey of grief was just beginning. They would learn to live with the absence of Sarah's bright presence, never imagining that their daughter's story was far from over. In the depths of the Pacific, forces were already in motion that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loss, hope, and the incredible will to survive against impossible odds. 3 weeks after Sarah Chen's memorial service, the research vessel Neptune's Quest was conducting a deep-sea geological survey 40 miles off the California coast, when their sophisticated sonar equipment picked up an unusual reading. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the lead marine geologist aboard the vessel, studied the sonar display with growing curiosity. What appeared on the screen didn't match the typical underwater topography they had been mapping for the past 2 weeks. The object was metallic, roughly the size of a small aircraft, resting on an underwater ledge approximately 800 feet below the surface. The location was within the general search area where Sarah's helicopter had disappeared, but it was much deeper than anyone had previously explored. The steep underwater canyon walls had hidden the wreckage from earlier search efforts, which had focused on shallower areas where survivors might have had a chance. Captain Mike Torres, the vessel's commanding officer, immediately contacted the Coast Guard to report their finding. Within hours, the USS Monterey, a guided missile cruiser equipped with advanced underwater recovery capabilities, changed course toward their position. The Navy was eager to recover any wreckage from one of their aircraft, both for investigative purposes and to provide closure to the families involved. As the Neptune's Quest maintained position above the Discovery site, Dr. Rodriguez continued her sonar scans, creating detailed images of the submerged aircraft. The helicopter appeared to be relatively intact, suggesting it hadn't suffered a catastrophic breakup during the crash. This was unusual for aircraft that hit the water at high speed, and it gave the recovery team hope that they might find answers about what had gone wrong during Sarah's final flight. The weather conditions were perfect for a recovery operation, with calm seas and clear skies providing ideal circumstances for the delicate work ahead. The Monterey arrived just as the sun was setting, its powerful searchlights illuminating the research vessel as the two crews coordinated their efforts. Commander Patricia Hayes, the Monterey's captain, brought years of experience in underwater recovery operations and a personal investment in bringing closure to military families. As night fell, the technical crews prepared their remotely operated vehicle, a state-of-the-art submarine capable of operating at extreme depths. The ROV was equipped with high-definition cameras, powerful lights, and mechanical arms that could manipulate objects on the ocean floor. The plan was to conduct an initial survey of the wreckage site, document everything they found, and then develop a strategy for bringing the aircraft to the surface. The first images transmitted from the ROV created an eerie silence in the Monterey's command center. The Seahawk helicopter sat upright on the ledge, its rotors missing, but the main fuselage appearing surprisingly intact. Marine growth had already begun to form on the aircraft's surface, but the basic structure remained recognizable. What struck everyone as unusual was how gently the helicopter appeared to have come to rest, almost as if it had been carefully placed rather than crashed. As the ROV moved closer to examine the aircraft's interior, something unexpected appeared on the monitors. A faint rhythmic blinking light was visible through one of the helicopter's windows. The technical crew initially assumed it was a reflection from their own lights, but the pattern was too regular, too purposeful. Commander Hayes ordered the ROV pilot to investigate further, her heart beginning to race as she recognized what they might be seeing. The blinking light was coming from inside the aircraft's cabin, pulsing in a steady pattern that every naval officer would recognize. It was an emergency locator beacon, the kind carried by all military aircrew in their survival gear. The beacon was designed to operate for weeks underwater, sending out a distress signal that could be detected by specialized equipment. But after 3 weeks, and given the assumed death of the pilot, no one had been actively monitoring for such signals in this area. The implications hit everyone in the command center simultaneously. If the beacon was still operating, it meant someone had survived the crash and had been trying to signal for help. Commander Hayes immediately ordered her communications team to scan all emergency frequencies, while the ROV continued its careful examination of the aircraft. The crew worked with renewed urgency, knowing that if someone was still alive down there, every second counted in what had already been an impossible survival situation. The emergency beacon signal cut through the static on the USS Monterey's communication equipment like a knife. Petty Officer First Class David Kim, the ship's senior electronics specialist, had been monitoring emergency frequencies for over a decade, but he had never heard anything quite like this. The signal was weak but unmistakably human in origin, transmitting in the standard military distress pattern that every service member learned during survival training. Commander Hayes stood behind Kim as he fine-tuned the equipment, her hands gripping the back of his chair. The beacon was definitely coming from inside the submerged helicopter, but what made the situation even more extraordinary was that the signal seemed to be getting stronger. This suggested that whoever was operating the beacon was actively trying to communicate, adjusting the device to improve transmission through the water and metal barriers surrounding them. Dr. Rodriguez from the research vessel had joined the Monterey's crew in their command center, bringing her expertise in underwater acoustics. She explained that the underwater canyon's unique geology was actually helping to amplify and direct the beacon's signal toward the surface, creating a natural acoustic channel that had allowed the transmission to reach them. Without this geological formation, the signal would have been absorbed by the water and never detected. The ROV continued circling the helicopter wreckage, its cameras capturing every detail of the aircraft's condition. The pilot's compartment appeared to be sealed, with no obvious breach in the hull that would have allowed water to flood the interior immediately. The helicopter's emergency flotation systems had partially deployed during the crash, which explained why it had descended relatively slowly rather than plummeting to the ocean floor. As the technical team worked to establish clearer communication with the beacon signal, another shocking discovery emerged from the wreckage site. The ROV's cameras detected movement inside the aircraft's cabin. It was subtle at first, just a shadow shifting behind the reflective surface of the pilot's window. But as the underwater vehicle maneuvered for a better angle, the impossible became undeniable. Someone was alive inside that helicopter. Commander Hayes immediately contacted the Navy's Special Operations Command, requesting the fastest possible deployment of a deep-sea rescue team. The situation required capabilities far beyond what the Monterey could provide. They needed specialized equipment, expert divers trained in extreme depth rescues, and medical personnel prepared to treat someone who had somehow survived 3 weeks in conditions that should have been impossible to endure. While waiting for the rescue team to arrive, the crew established a communication protocol with the survivor using the beacon signal. By varying the transmission pattern, they could send simple messages, and the person inside the helicopter responded by changing their own beacon's rhythm. It was primitive, but it worked. The survivor confirmed they were injured but conscious, and most remarkably, they indicated they had access to emergency supplies and a source of breathable air. The mystery of how anyone could survive such circumstances began to unravel as Dr. Rodriguez analyzed the helicopter's final resting position. The aircraft had come to rest against an underwater rock formation in such a way that it created an air pocket within the cabin. The helicopter's emergency life support systems, designed to function after water landings, had somehow continued operating long enough to establish a survivable environment. Sarah Chen, though the rescue team didn't yet know her identity, had managed to activate the helicopter's emergency survival mode during the crash. This system sealed the cabin, activated emergency oxygen supplies, and deployed emergency rations stored in the aircraft's survival kit. She had essentially been living in an underwater survival capsule, rationing her supplies and waiting for rescue while the world above mourned her death. The beacon signals became more frequent and urgent as the hours passed. The survivor was clearly aware that they had finally been found and was trying to communicate everything they could about their condition and the situation inside the aircraft. The signals indicated critical information about air supply, water levels, and injuries, all transmitted through the limited vocabulary of beacon pulse patterns that had become their only connection to the surface world. As dawn broke over the Pacific, the horizon revealed the approaching silhouettes of 2 additional vessels. The Navy's deep-sea rescue ship Mystic was racing toward their position, accompanied by a submarine rescue vessel carrying the specialized equipment and personnel needed to attempt one of the most challenging underwater rescues ever undertaken. The impossible survivor 800 feet below the surface was about to test the limits of human ingenuity and determination in ways no one could have anticipated. The arrival of the Navy's elite deep-sea rescue team transformed the ocean surface into a carefully orchestrated theater of operations. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a veteran Navy SEAL with over 15 years of underwater rescue experience, took command of the operation as soon as his team's vessel, the Mystic, reached the site. Morrison had participated in some of the military's most dangerous underwater rescues, but nothing in his experience compared to attempting to extract a survivor from 800 feet below the surface. The technical challenges were staggering. At that depth, the water pressure was nearly 25 times greater than at sea level, making traditional diving operations impossible. The rescue would require the use of atmospheric diving suits, essentially personal submarines that would allow the rescue divers to maintain surface pressure while working at extreme depths. Only a handful of people in the world were qualified to operate such equipment under emergency conditions. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the team's medical officer, studied the limited information they had about the survivor's condition based on the beacon communications. 3 weeks underwater, even with emergency supplies, would have taken a severe toll on anyone's physical and mental health. Dehydration, hypothermia, carbon dioxide poisoning, and psychological trauma were all concerns that would need to be addressed. The moment they made contact with the survivor, the first step in the rescue operation involved deploying a specialized communication pod that could establish direct contact with the helicopter's cabin. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Chen, an expert in underwater salvage operations, piloted the ROV carrying the communication device down to the wreckage site. The pod contained a sophisticated array of sensors, cameras, and communication equipment that would allow the rescue team to assess the situation more accurately. When the communication pod made contact with the helicopter's hull, the first clear images of the survivor appeared on the monitors in the Mystics command center. The person inside was conscious and alert, though obviously weakened by their ordeal. They had managed to fashion a crude signaling system using pieces of the helicopter's emergency equipment, and they responded immediately to the rescue team's attempts at communication through light signals and sound transmission. The survivor had demonstrated remarkable ingenuity during their weeks underwater. They had rigged the helicopter's emergency systems to create a sustainable environment, carefully rationing oxygen, water, and food supplies while maintaining hope that rescue would eventually come. The aircraft's emergency locator beacon had been modified to send more complex signals, allowing for basic communication with the surface team about their condition and the status of their survival equipment. Master, Chief Morrison and his team developed a rescue plan that would require precision timing and flawless execution. They would use the atmospheric diving suits to descend to the wreckage site, where they would attach specialized cutting equipment to create an emergency exit from the helicopter's cabin. The survivor would then be placed in a rescue pod that could safely transport them to the surface while maintaining proper pressure and life support. The most critical aspect of the operation was managing the pressure differential between the helicopter's cabin and the surrounding water. After 3 weeks, the survivor's body had adapted to the artificial environment inside the aircraft. Bringing them to the surface too quickly could result in decompression sickness or worse. Dr. Martinez calculated a careful ascent profile that would allow for gradual pressure adjustment during the rescue. As the atmospheric diving suits were lowered into the water, the entire rescue team held their breath. Chief Morrison and Petty Officer Rodriguez descended slowly, their suits' lights cutting through the darkness as they approached the helicopter wreckage. The survivor watched their approach through the aircraft's windows, probably experiencing a mixture of relief and disbelief after weeks of isolation in the underwater tomb. The cutting operation began with surgical precision. The rescue divers used specialized underwater cutting torches to create an opening in the helicopter's hull, large enough for the rescue pod. Every movement had to be carefully planned to avoid compromising the cabin's structural integrity or the survivor's life support systems. The work progressed slowly, with constant communication between the divers, the surface team, and the survivor inside the aircraft. When the hull breach was complete, Chief Morrison made his first direct contact with the survivor. Through the rescue pod's communication system, he spoke the words that would later become legendary in Navy rescue operations. "Lieutenant Chen, this is Master Chief Morrison, United States Navy. We're here to take you home." The voice that responded, weak but unmistakably determined, belonged to Sarah Chen, the pilot everyone had mourned just weeks earlier. The transfer from the helicopter to the rescue pod required careful coordination and absolute trust between Sarah and her rescuers. After 3 weeks of isolation and survival, she had to place her life completely in the hands of people she couldn't clearly see. Relying on their expertise to bring her safely to a surface she had begun to doubt she would ever see again. As the rescue pod sealed around her and began its slow ascent toward daylight, Sarah Chen's impossible survival story was finally approaching its climactic moment. The rescue pod's ascent through 800 feet of Pacific Ocean water took nearly 4 hours, with carefully planned stops at specific depths to allow Sarah's body to gradually adjust to changing pressure conditions. Dr. Martinez monitored every aspect of Sarah's vital signs through the pod's sophisticated medical equipment, watching for any signs of decompression sickness or other complications that could arise from her extended stay in the pressurized helicopter cabin. During the slow journey to the surface, Sarah was able to communicate more fully with the rescue team about her extraordinary survival experience. She described how the helicopter had hit the water during a sudden storm, and her quick thinking had allowed her to activate the emergency systems before the aircraft sank to its final resting place on the underwater ledge. The emergency oxygen supply, designed to last only hours, had been carefully rationed and supplemented by a small air pocket that had formed in the cabin's upper section. Her survival had depended on strict discipline and remarkable ingenuity. Sarah had calculated her water and food rations down to the smallest portions, stretching supplies meant for a few days into a 3-week survival timeline. She had used pieces of the helicopter's equipment to create a water collection system that captured condensation from the cabin walls, and she had maintained her physical and mental health through a rigorous routine of exercises and meditation, techniques learned during her military training. The psychological challenges of her underwater isolation had been as difficult as the physical ones. Sarah described long periods of complete darkness when she had to conserve the emergency lighting system, and the constant sound of water surrounding the aircraft that had initially terrified her but eventually became a familiar companion. She had maintained hope by focusing on her family and her determination to see them again, never allowing herself to believe that rescue was impossible. When the rescue pod finally breached the surface of the Pacific, the assembled rescue teams erupted in cheers that could be heard across the water. The sight of the pod emerging from the depths, carrying someone who had been pronounced dead and memorialized weeks earlier, created one of the most emotional moments in modern rescue history. Sailors aboard the USS Monterey lined the deck rails, many wiping tears from their eyes as they witnessed the impossible become reality. The medical team immediately transferred Sarah to the ship's medical bay, where Dr. Martinez and her colleagues began a comprehensive evaluation of her condition. Remarkably, Sarah was in relatively good health considering her ordeal. She had lost significant weight and showed signs of dehydration and muscle atrophy from her confined environment, but her vital organs were functioning normally, and her mental state was surprisingly stable given the trauma she had endured. Most urgent medical concern was treating the infections Sarah had developed from minor cuts and injuries she had sustained during the helicopter crash. 3 weeks in the humid, confined environment of the submerged aircraft had prevented proper wound healing and created conditions favorable to bacterial growth. However, none of her injuries were life-threatening, and the medical team was optimistic about her full recovery. As news of Sarah's rescue spread through military communication channels, the reaction was one of complete disbelief, followed by overwhelming joy. Her parents, who had spent weeks grieving their daughter's death, received a phone call that no parent ever expects to get. Commander Hayes personally contacted Sarah's father to inform him that his daughter was alive and being transported to the nearest naval medical facility for comprehensive treatment and recovery. The media response was immediate and intense. News organizations around the world picked up the story of the Navy pilot who had survived 3 weeks underwater in her crashed helicopter, transforming what had been a tragic story of loss into an inspiring tale of human endurance and military rescue expertise. The story captured public imagination in a way that few rescue operations ever had, combining elements of high-tech underwater rescue with old-fashioned human determination to survive against impossible odds. Sarah's first request upon reaching the surface was to contact her parents directly. The phone call between Sarah and her mother, Margaret, lasted nearly an hour, with both women alternating between tears of joy and amazement at the miraculous turn of events. Margaret described how the family had slowly been learning to live with their grief, never imagining that their daughter had been fighting for survival in the depths of the ocean. During the very time they were attending her memorial service, the rescue operation had required the coordination of multiple naval vessels, specialized equipment worth millions of dollars, and some of the most highly trained rescue personnel in the world. But for everyone involved, from Master Chief Morrison to the research scientists who had first detected the helicopter wreckage, the successful rescue represented the very best of human capability and determination. Sarah Chen had refused to give up during her 3 weeks underwater, and her rescuers had refused to accept that her survival was impossible. As the USS Monterey headed toward port with Sarah safely aboard, the focus shifted from rescue to recovery and understanding exactly how someone had managed to survive in conditions that should have been fatal within hours. Sarah's story would soon inspire changes in military survival training, improvements in emergency equipment design, and a renewed appreciation for the power of human determination when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. 6 months after her rescue from the depths of the Pacific Ocean, Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the Naval War College, sharing her survival story with a gathering of military personnel, engineers, and survival experts from around the world. Her recovery had been remarkable, both physically and mentally, though she still carried the subtle marks of her underwater ordeal in the form of scars on her hands and a slight hesitation when entering enclosed spaces. The Navy had conducted an extensive investigation into both the helicopter crash and Sarah's subsequent survival, leading to significant improvements in military aircraft emergency systems. The lessons learned from Sarah's experience resulted in enhanced emergency oxygen supplies, improved communication equipment for underwater scenarios, and better training for pilots facing water landings. Her survival techniques had been incorporated into military survival training programs, potentially saving countless lives in future emergencies. Sarah's parents, Margaret and James Chen, had become advocates for improved search and rescue technology, working with maritime organizations to develop better detection systems for underwater emergency beacons. Margaret often spoke about the 3 weeks when she had grieved for a daughter who was actually fighting for survival, and how the experience had changed her perspective on hope and the importance of never giving up on missing loved ones. The research vessel Neptune's Quest and its crew, particularly Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, received recognition for their role in discovering the helicopter wreckage. Dr. Rodriguez had continued her geological research in the area and discovered that the underwater canyon system was more extensive than previously known, potentially hiding other aircraft and vessels lost over the decades. Her work led to expanded efforts to locate and recover other missing military personnel. Master Chief Jake Morrison and his rescue team received the Navy's highest honors for their successful deepwater rescue operation. The techniques they developed during Sarah's rescue were refined and incorporated into standard Navy rescue protocols, improving the military's capability to conduct operations at extreme depths. Morrison often credited Sarah's own survival skills as being equally important to the mission's success as his team's rescue expertise. The story of Sarah's survival had captured international attention, leading to book deals, documentary films, and speaking engagements around the world. However, Sarah remained focused on her military career and her desire to improve aviation safety for other pilots. She returned to flying status after extensive medical and psychological evaluation, though she now served as an instructor pilot, passing on her unique experience to the next generation of naval aviators. The helicopter wreckage itself became the subject of extensive study by aircraft manufacturers and safety engineers. The way Sarah had modified the emergency systems to sustain her survival led to design improvements in emergency equipment for both military and civilian aircraft. The manufacturers incorporated her innovations into new aircraft designs, ensuring that future crews would have better survival capabilities in similar situations. Sarah's survival had been the result of multiple factors coming together in an almost miraculous way. The helicopter's controlled crash landing, the formation of an air pocket, the functionality of emergency systems, and her own knowledge and determination. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which humans will go to preserve life, both their own and others, when faced with seemingly impossible circumstances. The small coastal town of Mendocino, where Sarah's memorial service had been held, organized a celebration of life event to mark her safe return. Many of the same people who had attended her funeral gathered again, this time to celebrate rather than mourn. The church bells that had tolled for her memorial service rang out again, but now in joyous celebration of her survival and return to the community that had never forgotten her. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the medical officer who had overseen Sarah's care during the rescue, published research papers on the long-term effects of extended underwater survival that advanced medical understanding of extreme survival situations. Her work contributed to improved emergency medical protocols for similar rescue operations and enhanced the Navy's ability to care for personnel recovered from extended survival situations. The beacon that had saved Sarah's life was eventually recovered from the helicopter wreckage and displayed in the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum as part of an exhibit on survival and rescue technology. The simple device that had transmitted Sarah's cry for help through 800 feet of water had become a symbol of human ingenuity and the refusal to surrender. In the face of impossible odds, Sarah Chen's story became more than just a remarkable tale of survival. It became an inspiration that demonstrated how preparation, determination, and the refusal to give up hope could overcome even the most dire circumstances. Her 3 weeks underwater had transformed her from a skilled Navy pilot into a legend, whose experience would continue to save lives and inspire others long after her rescue from the depths of the Pacific Ocean. The woman who had been buried in the hearts and minds of her loved ones had returned not just to life, but to a purpose that extended far beyond her own survival, touching countless lives through the lessons learned from her impossible journey back from the deep.